afternoon, everybody. And I apologize for my presentation in advance. I'm not as good as the ones we usually have, Dr. Eisminger. But I talk about Tom Campbell just about every day, so I think I can manage. Where did I put my pointing thing? So I could go just about any direction with the life of Tom Campbell, his work overseas, his work in New Mexico, but mainly I'm going to concentrate on what he was mostly famous for, and that's his huge wheat farm out in Montana. And I should say wheat farms because it was more units than that. But he was born, is my thing going to work? Do we have an on-off switch? It worked for Gordon. Wow. No, it's... There you are. Where's my arrow? Yeah, no, we're there. Mom, I want you to do something. I don't know how. So here are Tom Campbell's parents. Tom Campbell Sr. and his wife, Elmira Richards. They came here from Perth, Ontario in 1875. Actually, Tom Sr. came first. He came and made a land claim in 1875. He was in the first batch when the Pembina Land Office first opened for settlement. He was there right in line with William Budge and our other pioneers making his land claim. And then he returned to Perth, Ontario, where he married his bride, Elizabeth Richards, who is of the Richards family where the Ray Richards golf course is. George Richards and his wife also came and settled in Grand Forks, and the golf course is where their farm was. So they were both born in Lanark County, Ontario, and I already said that. Their first home here was a sod claim shanty, and they lived in that for 4 years. And I know my grandma's stories about her parents' sod claim shanty in northern Minnesota, that it was spidery and it was dark and dim, but it was a warm shelter to get started with. He was in the county records as the county was organized in 1875. Tom Campbell Sr. was chosen to be one of our constables. Nicholas Hoffman was sheriff, but Tom was a constable. And they built the log cabin part of the Campbell house in 1879. Their children, they didn't have luck. It's sad about what happened to the Campbell children. Their first child passed away and is buried in Memorial Park, I didn't say cemetery, and without a name. It's a beautiful little stone, but the marker is there. Then Geneva Campbell was born in 1879, but sadly she died in 1986, probably bronchitis that went into pneumonia. It doesn't sound from the newspaper articles that it was anything infectious. Young Tom, their only son, was born in 1882 in the log cabin. He lived to the age of 84. He died in Pasadena, California, at age 84. He died in 1966. Sadie Campbell, I don't really know very much about her. I just learned about her a few years ago when I started dabbling with the family history on Ancestry to find a little more information. There are too many Sarahs nicknamed Sadie to figure out which one is her, but apparently she never married and didn't have children. Lizzie Campbell, born in 1886, she did marry and moved to Winnipeg, but they never had any children. When Elmira goes and lives with her in her old age and dies in Winnipeg. Katie Florence Campbell died of diphtheria in 1889. She was 4 years old. I should have posted a picture of her. She was cute as a button. Her father was away on a business trip when the tragedy happened. It was a quick illness and she passed away. Because of the fear of diphtheria and its infectiousness, she was buried before her father returned home. This is the Campbell house, about 1900. And I'm not quite sure who the people are, but I'm assuming it's an assortment of Campbells and Richards family members. Notice how the porch is different from what we have it today. It doesn't have the railing, but still, it's a fairly nice house. What is not commonly known is they also had a house on Reeves Drive. And I don't think it was a fancy house, but another land claim that Tom Sr. had was the south part of what is Reeves Drive today. And so I think they lived there probably through the winter and during the school months, so Tom attended school at Belmont and Central. So he's a Grand Forks boy, attended a one-room schoolhouse off in that direction somewhere, and Belmont School. He was confirmed at First Presbyterian. He graduated from Central in 1896, the year that his sister passed away. He attended Upper Canada College, which is a pretty important prep school. And then he returned to Grand Forks, received a BA degree from UND and a BS degree in engineering, the first engineering degree from UND in 1904. He went to Cornell to get a master's degree, and his father had a heart attack. He had to come home and take care of the farming interests here, and so he never completed that. But this is his graduation picture, appears in the 1904 yearbook for UND, and right next to his, right here on the page, it says, "A favorite of the ladies." And he was a handsome young man. Very jovial. He was very popular on campus. He was on the football team. He was the captain of the track team. He was, in the early days of hockey in Grand Forks, he was on one of the first club teams that they had at UND. So he was very athletic. So he graduates in 1904, and then in 1905, he becomes involved in the Pembina Portland Cement Company. And that's up at Concrete, North Dakota. And it was started by Earl Babcock. We have Babcock Hall at UND. And Professor Babcock enjoyed going out and exploring North Dakota in the summer months when he wasn't teaching. And he was up along the Tongue River in Cavalier County and found this site with clay that he believed this clay to be good for making Portland cement. And he returns home and he's telling his good friend Webster Merrifield, the president of the university, about this. And Merrifield is intrigued and decides he's going to invest. And so they start this company. They get some other investors. Professor Mackney goes in with them. They get some, Webster Merrifield actually went to England to secure financing for this mine that they thought was going to be, was going to make them rich. Unfortunately, it was not the right sort of clay to make Portland cement. It didn't have the right mineral content. It didn't have the right amount of lime in it. It didn't have enough silica in it. It wound up, so they changed the focus of the mine to produce hydraulic cement, which isn't highly prized, and it's fairly common, and it's not. Anyways, they decide, maybe we should get out of this business. So what do? They sell their interests to Tom Campbell and Dan Bull. Now, Dan Bull is the son of George Bull, George Bull was one of the founders of the Cream of Wheat Company. And Dan Bull also studied engineering at the university. And so between these two young men, they're going to make this company pay. And one of the big problems, the heart of the problem was the mineral content of this clay, but the other problem was transportation. There was no rail line up to this site for their mine up in Cavalier County. So they go to the Great Northern and try to talk them into building a branch line up to Concrete. And the Great Northern's like, No, we don't think that that's really within our interest. It's not going to make money. Their selling point was, well, yes, but you can haul our concrete one way and you can haul wheat from the other towns the other way. Mount North Dakota didn't have rail service, but that didn't work out. But they did manage to get some money and to purchase some equipment. They purchased a locomotive, and there's a picture of it up there on the wall. I'm sorry, it's way too big for my scanner to scan it into the PowerPoint presentation. But there's the locomotive of what became the Northern Dakota Railway Company. And they nicknamed, or somebody nicknamed the locomotive Maud. The Great Northern suggested they should buy a new engine. Tom Campbell thought, no, we can use this. This engine is less expensive and we're engineers and we can take care of it. And it was a disaster. It kept breaking down all the time and it didn't work out, and so the railroad was unsuccessful as well. In our files, we have this paper that was written by some mystery author. It doesn't have a name. It has footnotes that go nowhere. The information in it, for the most part, is good. There's nothing in here that I would really have found that would go against what the mystery author says about Northern Dakota Railway Company, except for at the end, at the conclusion, it irritates me a little because it blames Tom Campbell and Dan Bull for losing investors' money in this business venture. Well, if anybody's to blame, really, it's Earl Babcock, because he wasn't really a geologist, but he kind of moonlighted as one, apparently. And so this whole thing kind of turned into a debacle. It wasn't successful. Yeah, so they sold Babcock and Merrifield seller interest in 1905. But 1906 is a better year for Tom. He gets married to Bess McBride Bull, whose father, George Bull, is a founder of the Cream of Wheat Company. And in 1902, she became the stepdaughter of Webster Merrifield. And so I'm not quite sure how I feel about Webster Merrifield dumping off his shares in this horrible mining venture on his soon-to-be step-son-in-law, but Tom didn't seem to hold it against him, and neither did Dan Bull. Dan Bull liked him so much he named one of his boys Webster, after Webster Merrifield. They were married on the 3rd of October, 1906 at the First Presbyterian Church with a special reception at President Merrifield's house, the old president's mansion at the university, and a special streetcar was lined up to take attendees for the reception from South 3rd Street out to the university. They had arranged. Because as it happened, after he got out of the street railway business, Tom Campbell, after he got out of the cement mining business, he became the manager of the Grand Forks, Northern Dakota, we want to talk about. The Grand Forks Street Railway, or the trolley system, Tom Campbell becomes the manager of that after he gets out of the cement mine. And he's doing pretty well, but then his wife Bess becomes ill with tuberculosis. And for her health, it's suggested that they should move. They had a little boy, Tom Campbell III, and 1910, Bess moves with baby Thomas to go to improve her health, and the newspaper articles announced that she arrived safely with Master Thomas and that the warm climate was already doing wonders for her health. Sadly, Tom Sr. passes away in 1910 in Perth, Ontario. After he retired from farming, he went back to their hometown in Canada with Elmira. And then after he passes away, Elmira moves to Winnipeg and lives with her daughter, Lizzie, there. The 20th of August, Tom Campbell III passes away from spinal meningitis. And that's a inflammation of the spinal cord and the brain, and it must have been devastating. On the 24th of October, Tom himself was hospitalized at St. Michael's Hospital, and it's announced in the newspaper he has typhoid fever, but he is recovering. And it also announces that soon he'll be finishing up his business interests in Grand Forks in preparation to move to Pasadena, California permanently. So in Pasadena, he meets a man named J.S. Torrance, Jared S. Torrance, who's from New York State, and he's an excellent businessman, and his family moved to California for the sake of his father's health, and he loved California, and gets involved in various businesses, and he plans to build a mixed industrial residential city, Torrance, California. He didn't really want to name it after himself. He was kind of humble about it, but he got his arm twisted, and so they named it Torrance, California, and hired the Frederick Law Olmsted Jr. and his brother to plan out this new city. And Tom Campbell goes to work for them in planning the city of Torrance, California. So J.S. Torrance is important because World War I is going on and there is a shortage of wheat around the world. Tom Campbell gets the idea that he could put Indian reservation lands into wheat production and therefore help feed starving people across the world. And so he writes to Herbert Hoover. Herbert Hoover isn't president yet, but Hoover doesn't really care for Campbell. I don't know what is the reason there. They're both engineers and all of this, but Hoover's not interested. So Campbell, he's not afraid to go to the top. He writes to President Wilson, and Wilson thinks that this is a pretty good idea, so he puts him in touch with other people in the Bureau of Indian Affairs. And he goes out and he tours several sites to choose where he's going to start this farm. And it's his old boss, J.S. Torrance, gets him an introduction to meet J.P. Morgan Jr. so that he can finance this big operation that he's going to start. And he also gets a letter of introduction from Lewis Hill of the Great Northern Railway Company. And so he visits and meets J.P. Morgan Jr. And Morgan just thinks that Campbell is, he's a bright young man. He's got great ideas. He's got a really driving, cheerful personality, and he pretty much can talk anybody into anything. And he gets his $1 million from the J.P. Morgan Bank to start this farm, and he goes off and buys directly from the factory. No need to deal with middlemen. He goes to the Altman Taylor Tractor Company and bought 60 Altman Taylor tractors. And now here's my disclaimer. I did not grow up on the farm. So all this stuff about the tractors, I've had to give myself sort of a crash course on the early development of gasoline-powered tractors. I sent an email off to our good friend Kim Porter, and she suggested a book called Tractor Wars that I was going to show off to you today, and I forgot it when I went out the door. But it was helpful in explaining to me how the shift from steam power to gasoline-powered tractors. It tells quite a bit about Henry Ford, and it was the parallels. Henry Ford grew up on the farm, and he was just the drudgery, the repetitive hand labor of working on the farm. Henry Ford just had no patience for it. The first time he saw a tractor or a steam engine in 1875, he was just like, I've seen the future. I'm sick of going behind this horse. And so, yes, Henry Ford in his writings, he's like the drudgery of farm life, hand carrying pails of water back and forth. Why don't you just hook up a pipe to the pump and haul the water that way? Just things like that, modern methods of getting the work done so that it's less human labor. And so Tom Campbell's articles, he wrote in all sorts of national magazines, exactly the same story, that let's make machines do the work, make it easier some people criticized Campbell's his vision for farming, particularly after he had visited the Soviet Union and seen the collective farms. Tom Campbell was not advocating that all agriculture or production of wheat should be done the way he does it. His thing is to take marginal lands where it's drier, where you need a larger acreage to produce a crop, not, what we have here in Grand Forks, North Dakota, where the soil is rich and the farmers can make do with, the quarter section. When we get machinery, that's not enough land. You need a whole section or whatever. The farms are getting larger all the time because of our technology. And Campbell wasn't saying that he was wanting to put the family farms out of business. He just wanted to have these larger operations in areas where, like on the Crow Indian Reservation, the Native American people, they couldn't afford the machinery to put that land into wheat production. Where are we at? Montana Farming. So his farm is first called the Montana Farming Corporation. And he got the financing from J.P. Morgan Jr., but J.P. Morgan really didn't want it out there that he was one of the big backers of this thing. I don't know what was the reason for that, but he was just kind of quietly encouraging and helping out Tom Campbell. And so it evolved into 4 units, the farm in Montana, but at one time there were 7. So he had an acreage up at the Fort Peck Reservation, which was 300 miles or so north of Hardin, Montana. There were 4 units around Hardin. Camp number 2, he called them camps, and he described his camps and bunkhouses, everything, as we live military style. So people who would write to him asking for a job but had a wife and kids, he'd say, I'm sorry, we're not set up for wives and children. If it's a man and his wife, well, he could probably put the wife to work cooking at one of the cookhouses at one of these units. But there was no playgrounds or schools or anything for children. They live military style, they live in bunkhouses. Campbell didn't have his own house when he would come out from California to work. He stayed in the bunkhouses right with the men, and he ate with the men, and he was just sort of like every man. Eventually, though, World War I does come to a close. His first full year of production, 1918, and the war ends. So then he's still working 1919, and in the newspaper articles, he's breaking records with this huge machinery, plowing up hundreds of acres per day, breaking record after record out in Montana, getting everything ready to go. 1920, in the 1920s, the drought comes. 1919, in a magazine, oddly, there was an article about him in Psychology magazine. And it's an excellent article. The postcard that you got, the picture there, I scanned out of that magazine. And he says that in 1919, the grasshoppers were such a problem. And he's very scientific about how he does everything. And he's trying to calculate how many grasshoppers are actually out there. And so he rigs up a frame and puts it out there. And he measures this frame, and then he calculates after whatever period of time, they counted how many grasshoppers they had caught, and then multiplied that against how many acres they had, and they came up with what he called their grasshopper census, however many thousands of grasshoppers. And I'm sure he sent this information off to the Secretary of Agriculture. So the challenges of the 1920s, the drought, the grasshoppers, the wheat prices were low. Everything after World War I, the economy slows down. And another thing is, I'm ahead of myself. Labor needs. So he's not interested in hiring just your regular itinerant farm laborers. In the magazine, in the Psychology magazine, he tells about when he was 16, because of his father's health, he was managing the farm here in Grand Forks, and he was in charge of those crews, the threshing crews that would come in, and these were rough men with their bad language and their bad habits and all of this, and he didn't want those sort working for him on his farm. He would prefer to have young clean-cut workers, college students when they were not in school. From Minneapolis. During one harvest year, he brought in 500 high school boys from Minneapolis to work out in Montana. And they made some pretty good money and went back, and they were all in the newspaper, very happy, looking forward to the next year to do it again. So he liked the younger men before they had developed these bad habits. He also, this is an excellent book. Deborah Fitzgerald, I don't know if she's retired by now or not. I met her in 1999. We both went to there was a reunion of people who had worked on the Campbell family farm. And so she was there. She had been doing research for this book. There's a whole chapter on the Campbell Farming Corporation. And she went through his papers at the Montana Historical Society. And one criticism that she has is he tended to micromanage a bit. So he's writing off letters to his foreman. Oh, I noticed that tractor wasn't running quite properly. You make sure those men are oiling them regularly. And he's got a big investment in all this machinery, so I can't really pick on him for that. But on one occasion, he wrote to one of the foremen asking him to please not loan the car to the guys on Saturday night so they can go into town. He was a teetotaler himself, and he didn't approve of that sort of behavior. So now the highlight is, while we were in Montana in 1999, they had in this room on a film projector playing on this little screen. You could, not really easy to see, but Campbell had hired the P-A-T-H-E, Pathé Film Company, to come and take films out at his farm. He was always promoting. He was in the newspapers a lot. He was in the magazines a lot. And in this way, people knew who he was. He was probably the best known. There were other people farming large acres of land, but he was the most well-known. So now I have to go over here and because if I switch over to the mouse to operate the film, I lose my other thing. Where are we now? I have to do what I wanted it to do. Over here. Everything go for me? Come on, we've got film. So these are guys working on his farm, and at different times you'll see different stages of the development of the machinery. So at one point we've got a steam engine, and we've got the thrashing machine. Now this is something maybe not on this scale, but my great-grandfathers would have recognized the scene. We go to Heritage Days and we watch the steam threshing reunions. Yeah, very dramatic, showing the chaff shooting out of the machine. Yeah, this shot here, this cameraman should have been fired. Cut off the guy's heads. The guy in the middle might be Tom, but we can't really see his face. He's always wearing jodhpurs. It's like, what's the deal with jodhpurs? I don't know. But I guess maybe they were very fashionable in the 20s. My grandma would say, very sport. And I don't know why in the world they set the haystack on fire. Luckily, there isn't any wind, because in the another where you can see the steam engine, the smoke is just going straight up in the air, so that's kind of a lucky thing. But yeah, maybe we better get out of here, guys. Pack up and move.
No.
Yep, here we go. Yep, we're getting our picture taken. Yep. Slick your hair out of the way. But these are his agricultural engineers. He wanted people that understood the machinery. He's invested a lot of money into his machinery, and he wants to make sure that somebody's not going to come along and break it. He has certain producers that he preferred over others. I mentioned the Altman Taylor tractors that he had. He also will see a lot of Holt tractors. And first time I'm watching these, and I see this big Holt written across the back of one of the machines, and so I had to look this up because, like I said, I didn't grow up on the farm, and I'm not an expert on machinery. But the Holt Tractor Corporation evolves into the Caterpillar Company, and I didn't know that until working on this project. Oh, there he goes on his Stutz Bearcat. I got to see the Stutz Bearcat when I was in Montana. I got a picture of my Angie standing next to it. It was pretty neat. Hopefully this one's just about done. We'll get on to another one. We got a new one? So here we're still bringing wheat to the machine. And this is going to be too slow for Tom. He's got to figure out a better way to do this. So I suppose during the off season, he's writing to the tractor and the implement manufacturers with ideas how to better, to make everything more efficient. Because he says in his articles, if you go into the field and cut the wheat, and then you go into the field again to pick up the wheat, and then you go into the field again to thresh the wheat, you're compacting the soil and you're wasting fuel because you're repeating your trips in. Here we go. Here's our Holt tractor. And see all those wagons he's got. On one seat, I counted 37 wagons. Fitzgerald's book, she notes that he buys equipment from the Case Tractor Company and asks them if they would send an engineer out to demonstrate the new development in this machinery so that they can operate it better. And the Case Company would do that, and the Holt Company would do that. And then he has a grumpy letter he sends to the Stinson Tractor Company. Now, I'd never heard of the Stinson Tractor Company, but in the course of the letter, he says, my father and I always had good relations working with Leslie Stinson in Grand Forks. And like, oh, well, that rings a bell. Leslie Stinson lived on Fenton Avenue in Grand Forks. And if you remember Electric Construction on South 4th Street, Leslie Stinson built that building, and he started out selling implements and wagons, and then he sold tractors and machinery, and then he switched over to selling Chevrolets and Pontiacs. And he's buried in Memorial Park. But the Stinson Tractor Company, he must have been an investor in it. So I looked up in the census records of his family, and sure enough, he is the second of 5 or 6 brothers. And so his brothers had this tractor company in Minneapolis. And Campbell buys these tractors from his old friend's brother's business, and it was junk. They didn't use strong enough metal, the blocks cracked, and they wouldn't come out and repair them, and so hence the grumpy letter saying, well, we always had good business dealings with Leslie Stinson, but his brothers, well, they were in financial trouble. The company didn't live very long, obviously. They didn't build a quality product. Steam engines get a little speed behind them, I guess. In 1887, on my great-grandfather's farm near St. Thomas, they were harvesting and the steam engine blew up and 2 men were killed. And so I go to the demonstrations and I stand back a little bit. But I don't know what the cause of the thing was, but away they go to find another pile to harvest. Okay, well, we don't want that. Let's go to Tom and Bess. Did we get Tom and Bess? No? There we go. We'll do this. Now we're in the order I wanted it. Yep, so here we're plowing. And count how many tractors we'll eventually see. I think these are McCormick Deering, but is that what it is? Because looking at the fuzzy letters on the front, that was my best guess, so thank you, Rick. And here again, Tom Campbell wants people who know how to operate the machinery. All these tractor drivers. And all the better if they have good personal habits. And for these companies that receive 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Yep. Yeah, look at all the. See? Now we put the thing in motion. Or he is, I should say. And he's got to have some really heavy-duty steel hooking all these things together, like a great big rod. In another scene, you can see a little bit better the tractor pulling the reaper and the conveyor that's putting it up into the threshing machine. They'll get to the point where there's going to be a wagon where it pulled alongside also, and when it fills up, they just leave it in the field, add another wagon, and go. And then afterwards, the Holt tractor will come and hook all the wagons together like a train. But what is the commercial lately? Is it Farm Credit Services or an insurance company with all the John Deeres going down the field? Reminds me of Mr. Campbell. What was that? Well, they better not, I guess. Well, in some of these too. Yeah, check this out. You count how many guys. You got the driver and you got the guy up there keeping track.
Well, what year was that, Leah?
1928. Yep, this is all out in his Montana farms. Yeah. Yeah, well, he had so many areas. So he had the Hardin areas, he had the Fort Peck, he only farmed a couple of years because it was 300 miles away and it was just too hard to manage from that distance. So he concentrated more on the 4 farms in the Hardin area. Interesting, he had one piece southwest of Hardin that it was kind of hard to access. And so he hired a Japanese family to manage that for him. And they were there for a couple of years and they were good workers, but this, I guess Montana was too wide open for them. They made a good or bad decision to move back to Japan.
At the height, how many employees did he have?
You know, I would say in the hundreds, because he talks about modern methods of business, modern methods of engineering, and not just out in the field. He's got secretaries and stenographers and people, you know, doing office work and things like that for him. You know, the harvest time when they needed extra people, that's when he might pull in a little more unskilled labor. But as far as the Native Americans went, this land, you know, they couldn't afford machinery to farm it, so they would rent it out for grazing. And for grazing, they would get, if it was a dry area, 6 cents an acre. If there was an area where there was a stream with some water, maybe 20 cents an acre. Campbell started out at 50 cents an acre, and then the next year it would be 75 cents an acre, and the year after that $1 an acre. So the Crow people mostly preferred to work with Tom Campbell, and they adopted him as a member of their tribe in 1947.
Do you know, you mentioned he bought all the tractors. Does he actually end up buying the combine units as well?
Yes.
That's a huge capital outlay.
Yeah. Yeah, a lot of them, and he had a machine shop in Hardin, and so a lot of these modifications he's doing himself with his own engineers and writing to the companies that are building the machinery, hey, I came up with this modification. You might want to incorporate this in next year's model of tractor or combine or whatever the machinery is.
Did he ever lease that equipment to custom combiners? Because there's an entire industry where you have combiners moving in the south by northwards, right?
Yep.
Big event of the season, because it's just so capital intensive.
Yeah, I don't believe he did. I haven't found anything that points to that. And he was, you know, kind of fussy. You know, he wanted people that knew what they were doing. If his machinery is out of his custody, what's going to happen to it? Whoops.
How close was he farming here in Nevada?
Very close. Camp number 2 was within sight of the Little Bighorn battlefield. And Tom Campbell hosted the 50th and 75th commemoration of the Little Bighorn battle. He wrote a letter inviting Dwight Eisenhower, who at the time was the supreme commander of NATO, inviting him to come to the 75th anniversary. And I have a copy of Eisenhower's reply in the Campbell house saying that he regrets he is not able to come at this time. He's over in Europe. But General Marshall came instead. So that's pretty high company. Tom Campbell did volunteer for military service during World War II. That's kind of another story, but yes.
This picture that you have on the table is on the Veterans Park Memorial Wall.
Yes. I saw that as I was going through my papers, and I thought, well, I might as well lay it out on the table. He started out as a colonel. Well, he was basically kind of hired as a transportation expert. Obviously, this is in the middle of nowhere, and he's got to figure out how to get the wheat from point A to point B. But he was also involved in the development of napalm. And I have a letter from Secretary of War Stinson, or a letter to Secretary of War Stinson. Campbell is apologizing for his late reply to Stinson's letter, whatever it was about, I don't remember, because Campbell was away on loan to the Navy teaching them how to mix the napalm. And he uses the word napalm. They had been calling it the firebomb. They put the petroleum jelly in these compressed air tanks and mixed it up that way. But mostly he was in transportation. Now, when we went to Montana in 1999, there was family there as well as people who had worked for Campbell, and there was this elder of the tribe who was persuaded to speak. He didn't really want to get up in front of people, but he was wearing his American Legion cap, and he spoke about Tom Campbell, his first memories. When he and his brother were little boys, they went with their grandmother to his office so she could get her payment for her land allotment. And she left them outside and told them, now you behave yourself, I'm going to talk to Mr. Campbell. And so she goes in, and he's a very chatty fellow. He's there, asking her about her family and things like that. And she says, well, I'm sorry, I have to go. I left my grandsons outside. And he asked her to bring them in. And so he shook hands with both of them, introduced himself, and opened his office drawer and gave them candy. And this man says, you have to understand, we were very poor. There was no candy on the reservation, not even at Christmas time. And Tom Campbell would bring candy for the kids. But they also looked forward to when he was coming, because in the one shot you saw him zoom by in his car. So there was a particular high spot where the boys would go and watch for him, because he would come zooming in on his car, and there was this particularly sharp turn, and he would just zoom right around it, and the boys thought that was pretty impressive. But he was also a World War II vet, and he said that he and his brother, they were together, and their unit, whatever it was preparing for the invasion of Sicily. And they get a call to report to headquarters. And he says, and our captain says, who do you know? We don't know anybody. Well, you better go. So off they go, and they show their pass or whatever. And it's Tom Campbell. He had kept track of the boys that had worked for him that were in the service. And he, whenever he could, would check on them and then write to their families and let them know that I had visited Barney and he is doing very well. He says, so all of this is going on, preparing to invade Sicily. And what are we talking about? That there had recently been a hailstorm in Montana. And what that might do to the price of wheat this year. See? Oh, better get your tractor out of the way. So these films, like I said, these are on YouTube. So you tractor experts out there can go on YouTube and get a little bit more, from this, but I wanted to be able to show, once I discovered that these were now publicly available. But yeah, he's got the steel wheel tractors. I don't know if this was just for the sake of the drama of the shot, but going after dark. And I'm not sure that I pasted all of these into here because I didn't want to make you sit there all afternoon. But like in some of them, yes, they're able to keep up the pace because the 20s, I mentioned before, is a year of drought. And some of these, I think it was kind of funny. We're watching these films on this little screen when we were at Hardin, and this Deborah Fitzgerald says, "Are those windrows?" And I'm looking to figure out what she's talking about. Windrows? And I finally, light bulb goes off. Oh, where I come from, we call them SWATs. But yeah, the swaths are pretty thin in some of the shots. Oh, here, the lower left, this is his wife. This is Bess. Oh, here we got the Campbell girls. Well, not the first shot. I don't know who the first, oh. Well, the preview picture fooled me. Yeah, there's the Altman Taylors. So he's where did I put my pointer stick? He's got this conveyor that's picking up the swath and dumping it into this. And then the man up there is making sure that it goes where it's supposed to. Here's the wagon over on the side, and it's dropping the wheat into that. But this was a implement for picking up bundling hay, and he adapted it for this. So there's a conveyor going up and another going across. So there is one of his Altman Taylor tractors is on display at the Bighorn County Historical Society, and that's like your last stop on your way to the Little Bighorn battlefield. And so I climbed up on the back of it, said, "Jeffy, take my picture." And I climb up on there and he takes the picture, and I get down and then he points. There's a sign on the front, "Please stay off the tractor." So nobody saw it. I didn't get scolded. Yeah, you can see that's not quite full. That's a pretty weak swath they're picking up there. Between the drought and the grasshoppers, I suppose. No, Case. He liked the Case company. Yeah, see, it's pretty thin right there.
And you operated these all through the 30s?
Yes. Yeah, so it's a struggle, but he manages to keep going through the drought of the 20s, and it only gets worse in the 30s. But in 1929, he was approached by the Soviet government. Somebody has seen all this publicity about this guy in Montana, and they invite him to help with the 5-year plan for agriculture. And at first he says no, and he wrote a book about this that I meant to show to you, but I forgot it on the kitchen table. His book called Market or Menace, and he describes his first introduction, and he says no, he doesn't like communists and all of this, and he doesn't want to go to Russia. And they said, well, we'll pay for your trip, we'll pay you a consultation fee. And if you're still not impressed or not wanting to be involved, we will just, you can say no and go back home and no hard feelings. And so he and his wife went to Moscow, and it was wintertime, and they got off the train and it was 50 below. They had been warned, now you realize you're going to Russia, it's going to be cold. And they're like, we're from North Dakota, we know what cold is. Well, they got off the train and the cold air practically took their breath away. So then they had to get Russia-style winter clothing. And he took a look at the operation. There is a film from his second trip to Russia in 1931. And this trip was to the Crimea. And he visited some of the big collective farms there. And there's a shot that could just as well have been Montana. It's the Holt tractor pulling the machinery exactly the way Campbell makes them work together. but it was in Crimea. They did brought his family along. They had a vacation, and there's a film showing them on a boat and things. But so in his book, he writes that, I don't approve of communism, but he says the Russians were so far behind the rest of the world in technology that maybe it's necessary just to bring them into the 20th century. And he met Joseph Stalin, he says in his book. But in his conclusion of the book, he says that maybe after a couple of generations, they will throw off their communist masters and become a market economy like the rest of us. And Stalin didn't care for that. And so it appears in the New York Times. Stalin disputes, claims, says he never met this man, says he never whatever. And somewhere there's supposed to be a transcript of his meeting with Joseph Stalin. And it's not at the Montana Historical Society, and it's not at the Zimmerman Library at New Mexico. He had a huge mining operation in New Mexico. So when I spoke to his granddaughter, who lives in Billings, Montana, I asked her about it. Wow, that would be great to find. Well, and she told me, and this is 20 years ago, that she has a room full of documents left that relate to Grand Forks. And it's when she finds the time, and well, everybody's busy. I'm not going to be one to criticize, but at some point she intends to send those documents to Grand Forks. And the first thing I would look for is that transcript of his meeting with Joseph Stalin, just to say, hey, see, he really did. Oh, here they are, everybody's in a good mood. Yep. Oh, we're getting our picture taken. Take off your hat. Yeah, I don't know who these kids are. These are not the Campbell children, but they'll come up eventually. Here we've got shocks of wheat. There's Tom right here, in his jodhpur. He's very handsome. So I think, because it's such a massive area, as he's developing his windrow method, he's doing that in some spots, but maybe on this farm, whatever unit it is, they still have the other machinery where they have to pick up the shocks. Oh, here we got windrows again. This one's looking a little healthier. He writes in his articles that I don't have farm laborers, I have agricultural engineers. And he says, if you hire the best men and pay them at the top of their level of pay for what they do, they will reward you by being more efficient. They want to keep their job. They're making more money working for you than with any of the other guys. But then these different camps that he had, he would have them compete against each other, and they would get bonuses. So whichever unit had the best fuel economy, every man is paid a bonus. Whoever got their wheat crop in first, every man gets a bonus. Whoever had the fewest breakdowns, so they get the best pay, and then they could add to it from there. There's the Campbell girls. Yeah, the poor chicken. This will be the last one that I've prepared for you, and then you could just ask me a few questions and have some more cider. Look at the cameraman. You can see his shadow. Mm-hmm. And that's Case again. Oh, no, I didn't mean to do that. Where did I go? Oh, okay. Oh, this one is kind of humorous. So now he's got some visiting dignitaries coming to the farm. And there might be politicians, they might be representatives of some of these implement companies that he's dealing with. I'm not really sure. Maybe they're reluctant to come out. They knew what happened to Custer. But here's Tom greeting them. He always wore that hat. The Crow people first called him the man with the hat. That's what the man at the reunion said. But then when they adopted him, they gave him an official name, which means known all over the world. But yeah, I'd like to know who these guys are. Nobody's ringing a bell to me. I'm not recognizing anybody. But he had dignitaries come out all the time. Oh yeah. In the 50s, there were Russian farm experts touring the United States. And Eisenhower was president, and one of the places he suggested they should see is the Campbell farm in Montana. Campbell and Eisenhower were good friends up until Campbell passed away. I've got a nice stack of letters that they exchanged. Campbell was even invited to a stag night at the White House in 1957. Oh, of course he was there. But when these farm experts from Russia came in the 50s, they had never heard of him. And they're asking him, what kind of wheat do you grow? And he says, this is Kharkov wheat. I got it when I visited your country many years ago. And they had no idea who he was or that he had been there. But see how he is? Smiling and happy with the guys. And that's exactly what I expected to see from all of his writings and things. He was a friendly man, but he knew his business. But then too, he writes in the magazines, you know, of course you pay your workers the highest level of pay because everybody knows this is simply good business. And it's like, I don't think everybody knows. Yeah. Yeah, look casual.
What year would this be from?
This is 28, about. Maybe earlier. I had come across, in Chronicling America, a newspaper article that told me specifically that this Pathé film company was coming. And for some reason I didn't clip it, and I can't find it again. But yeah, we'll just stand here and you can film us and we'll tell a little joke. Oh, now they're having lunch.
It's obvious that they didn't rock her.
Yeah. Yeah, so the facilities that they had at these various units, they had showers, they had a cookhouse, they had, you know, the bunks were clean, everything was, you know, well kept up. One man who worked for him said that the first time he had ever taken a shower in his life was when he worked for Campbell, and he thought it was the greatest invention ever. And we had a lunch there that was supposed to be a typical feed for the Campbell farm, and it was amazing. Ham and mashed potatoes, and it was like Sunday dinner. Yeah, I'm looking at these containers too. Oh yeah, smile. My grandma would talk about threshing time and all the pails of coffee and pails of food that they would bring out to the workers, and it didn't make sense to me, but let's see here. So there. I think there are a couple more films on YouTube, but you can, if you're still interested, you can go online and find them. But that's what I've got. Any questions?
How long did the farm stay in business?
Until 1987. So Campbell operated it. He had a heart attack and then he had a stroke. He passed away in 1966. After that, his oldest daughter managed the farm until 1987. And that's when it ceased to be the Campbell Farming Corporation. And if I should have taken a screenshot from Google Earth. Like here we have the checkerboard pattern if you fly over the fields. Out there, it's long stripes. So there's a yellow stripe and then a black stripe. And these go on for miles. Jeff asked one man who worked for Campbell, what did you do? He says, I got in the tractor and I went that way until lunchtime. So it hadn't been plowed before. This was virgin prairie, so there's no township and range squares in the ground. And he described himself as a crank on soil conservation. So he would have these long strips that would lay fallow, and then the long strip that they would farm. And that's something that I think he probably evolved that technique into the 30s. But like I said earlier, he wasn't afraid to go to the top. So he wrote to Wilson. I really don't have any documents from there, but he wrote to Hoover fairly often. And Hoover just kind of, I don't know, just kind of like, yeah, okay, thanks for the information. In 1932, during the presidential campaign, Campbell is a Republican, and he keeps writing to President Hoover. There's still time for you to save the farm vote, but you have to change the tariff to protect the farmers. Everything else was protected except for agriculture. And Campbell's writing to him over and over and over, and Hoover doesn't change that policy. Well, I don't know if just the president could, but we all know who won the election in 1932. And then Campbell writes a letter of introduction to the incoming president, Franklin Roosevelt, saying, you know, who he is, that he's got this operation he's been doing out in Montana, working on dryland farming, and he's developed some techniques that he would be happy to share with the incoming administration if he could be of any use. And Roosevelt writes him back this nice letter, and they become very good friends. He just loved Franklin Roosevelt, didn't care much for Harry Truman. And then Eisenhower becomes president, and I've got, these are the FDR library papers. There's quite a few there. These are the papers from the Eisenhower library. And yeah, so Henry Ford, he came to meet Henry Ford, and with his methods of producing wheat and you know, efficiency, he's had that in common with Henry Ford. So a lot of important people. He was just, yes.
Was our rail service on the Palisades, so we connect with the North Pacific?
They would bring all their wheat to Hardin, and that's where it would get on the train. Okay. Probably. Yeah,
but it was the rail, that's it.
okay, yeah, I don't really know the geography of it all that well, but that's the main thing, get it to the railroad. But another thing he wrote that most farmers, a mistake that they made was they sell their wheat at the time of the harvest, and that's when the prices are the lowest. And he was always advocating to store your wheat until the price goes up and then sell it. And I don't know if there's any connection at all, but Gene Munson was our treasurer here for many years, and he lived on Chestnut Street. And he told me, if you get to Chestnut and 13th, there are 4 fairly large houses there, about the same size. And Gene pointed out to me that they all have a different floor plan because they had been moved into town. They were originally granaries. And I thought, I wonder. Because he advocated that the government provide help for farmers to have better means of storing their grain so they could get a better price. And I was just kind of curious in the back of my head if there was any sort of connection with that, but I'll never know. It's one of the odd things I think of when I'm driving.
So all the Campbells left town before World War I, yet they kept this property for decades later. So
Yes.
he expressed nostalgia for Grand Forks. So.
He did. He would visit off and on. There were cousins in the area, like the Richardses I mentioned before. But so the home place here, Tom Sr. bought this house with 80 acres, and then he had another quarter section where Campbell Drive is, and they had another quarter section out by Merrifield, and he had a quarter section out by the university near his brother-in-law, George Richards. So Tom Sr. had quarters scattered here and there. And in articles, Tom Jr. says that his father farmed 1,000 acres in Grand Forks County. And it's not 1,000 acres altogether, but it could be that he rented some land over here and did something over there. I don't have any reason to doubt the truth of his statement. Yes?
With that many acres and it's on a reservation land, did he negotiate rents with some government official or with individuals on the reservation? That would be a lot of individuals if they had to negotiate with each one.
He did work with the Bureau of Indian Affairs, and what he paid them was a better deal than what they got for grazing fees. I found one article that was critical, but it wasn't specifically aimed at Tom Campbell. There was a Chippewa newspaper, I think called the Tomahawk, that reported that the Bureau of Indian Affairs ought to be working for us and not these developers. And I can't blame them for that. So in South Dakota, there was a big rancher that had worked with the Bureau of Indian Affairs to secure land for this big ranching operation of his. And the point of view from this article, that the Native Americans' complaint was that isn't the Bureau of Indian Affairs supposed to be serving the Indians? And one would think that it would. And Campbell worked with the Bureau of Indian Affairs, and the Campbell Farming Corporation was mentioned in this article, but not so much criticism of Campbell personally, it's the criticism of the Bureau of Indian Affairs. So, all right, well, thanks for everything.